Well, welcome to another video on this Canon EOS 5 DSR camera. My name is Peter Lee. I'm a commercial, wildlife and landscape photographer, and a month ago I produced a video recommending that this is a tremendous buy to get this Canon 5 DSR, which I think is about still $1,500, but do watch the earlier video and I think you'll enjoy that. I did receive numerous comments from this video and all very favourable, and also the request for the settings that I use to photograph birds. Now, if I'm going to do birds in flight, I generally use my mirrorless camera, the Canon R5. I find it a little bit easier to use for birds in flight, but for static birds, in other words birds that are in hedgerows, fences, trees, etc., I find that this is really the better camera setup to use. So a little bit about the camera itself and the lens that I have on here. I've got the Canon 5 DSR camera linked to a 500mm f4 prime lens. But I also have a 1.4 extender on here, so instead of 500mm, I actually have a 700mm lens coming out to be f5.6. Typically I would shoot at, say, about f6.3 or even, say, 7.1, but I'll discuss this a little bit later in the settings. The camera itself, it's not the latest iteration of the 500mm lens. If I had the latest version, if I could still buy it, would be $9,000. But I found this earlier model lens in absolutely pristine mint condition, complete with camo, everything here, nice case, for $3,600. So that was my investment last year. And the only changes that I've made to this lens is I've taken off the Canon foot and replaced it with a Arca Swiss type foot. This one is by Royal Stuff, the RSS. So that's the foot that I have, and I could make do with a Canon foot, but having an adapter plate, but I prefer just to go straight to an Arca Swiss foot. So that's the only changes I've made to this lens. Currently I have it mounted on a Katana Pro Media Gear gimbal, and it does make taking pictures of birds so much easier. It's a 12-pound or nearly 12 pounds setup with camera and lens, and if you're trying to hold this and take pictures of birds at the same time, you'll find it very difficult. But with a slight adjustment of the gimbal here, what is just 12 pounds can be actually moved very simply with just a finger quite easily, and it will stay exactly where you place it. Makes it very easy. So for Pro Media Gear Katana, I'll leave a link below and you'll be able to explore the gimbal for yourself, but it's highly recommended if you want to get into this sort of weight. So first of all, I'm going to just discuss two pictures that I took. I took them a couple of days ago, and they were in my garden. One of them, of course, is the white-crowned sparrow, and this came out to be at 1000 ISO. I can assure you, if you get your settings correct on this camera and using post-production, correct post-production, ISO is not really a major problem. If it's up to 1600 or 3200, I shouldn't be too concerned about the ISO and any sort of grains, but I'll talk about that later in another video on post-production. The second picture is of the mourning dove, a great favourite of mine, and we talk so much about this eye autofocus of the R5 and how wonderful it is. I can assure you, for static birds, if you get your focusing correct, and I'll suggest what settings I use, you can find that even the eye of this mourning dove is absolutely pin sharp with a little catchment in the eye at the same time. So there's get the settings correct and you'll end up with some beautiful pictures. So I'm going to switch over now to discussing the settings. But to get to the settings, there's a link below, and that's to a PDF document. Just open up the PDF document, print it out, and you'll be able to see exactly the settings that I use. And I'll talk over that in a few minutes. So having discussed the camera, the lens that I've typically used for shooting static birds, trees, hedgerows or fences, I would like to talk about the actual settings of the camera and the lens itself. And you should by now have got the PDF document, which is below. Just open that up, print it, and you'll be able to work along and have a cheat sheet as you set your own camera. And these are the settings that I typically use for taking static birds, hedgerows, trees, bushes, etc. Before getting my 500mm prime lens, the f4, I was using the 100 to 400mm zoom lens, and of course with the 1.4 extender on that, I'm coming out to be about an f8, bit limiting, and so typically if I was using that lens, I'd be coming out to be 400 times 1.4, I'd be coming out at 560mm and f8, and it worked quite well. But I do like the other lens, the 500mm prime, which can go all the way up to 700mm, and typically I'm shooting at f6.3. Occasionally I might change that to f7.1, but most of it's 6.3. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm on manual setting. Forget any sort of aperture priority or shutter priority, just set it to M for manual setting. There are three variables here. You've got your shutter speed, you've got your aperture, and you've got your ISO rating. And typically I like to have my fix my aperture, fix my shutter speed, and use a variable for my ISO. So straight away, when it comes to the ISO, I would set that to be auto. Very simple, change your ISO to auto. And typically I would set my shutter speed at 1/200th of a second, and the aperture as above. Typically I would be shooting at f6.3. So if I'm going to make any adjustments at all, typically I would just change the shutter speed. I might go up and down a little bit depending on whether the bird is moving, and just look at my ISO and make sure that that's correct at the same time. So there we are. You're fixed at your shutter speed, typically about 1/200. Your aperture on this lens, I'm shooting at about f6.3 and allowing my ISO to fluctuate under auto. My autofocus, of course, is on. I need autofocus, so make sure that's on. Image stabilization, the IS, I always turn that off. Why do I need image stabilization? It's going to slow me down even by a fraction of a second, and I'm on a tripod anyway with a gimbal, Pro Media gimbal. Do look at my link below at the Katana, and I'm going to supply that link to the Pro Media gear because it really will help you. So by using that, my image stabilization is off. I'm going to not shoot in continuous at all. Most I'll get is about 5 frames a second. That's not really much good for me, and these are static birds anyway. They're not going to go anywhere, so I would have a single shot. And now we come to the AI focus. Now you can use servo. I prefer not to use servo. I prefer to use AI focus. And one thing about AI focus is you get a nice sounding beep when you're in focus. You don't get that with servo, but you do get that with AI focus. So that's my recommendation. Try the AI focus. When you press or depress halfway the shutter button, you hear a nice beep. that means you're in focus and you can then take the picture. It's all very, very simple. The last point, of course, is the autofocus selection mode, and I've given a description or a diagram of which one to select, and I particularly like this one of the center point being my point of focus with the 4 other selection points around the central one, the sort of the 5 points of focus. It seems to work extremely well with me. The morning dove, for example, I use that, and look at the eye. It's perfectly sharp and no trouble at all. So that's sort of my recommendation. It's a great camera, and I think you'll have a lot of enjoyment using this camera, and with the correct settings I think it will make it even more worthwhile. Once you try my settings, you may want to adjust them slightly for your own setup, your own lens, and experiment a little bit, but do try this to get started at least, and I trust that it's very, very helpful. Again, if I can help you in any way, do please leave a comment below. We're here to, each of us, to improve our photography. You help me to improve mine. Hopefully I help you to improve your photography. Once again, do give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and do please subscribe. And there'll be more videos on the way. The next 2 I want to look at is both in post-production, and this is an extremely interesting area, and particularly with the way that lenses are being developed today, where the idea of distortion, chromatic aberration, etc., is it in the lens, is it in the camera, or is it in the software? This is an absolute important topic to discuss, because if you get this right, then you will end up with beautiful, beautiful pictures. So that will be the next video I'm producing, and then there's the other one will be in post-production, and how I use my workflow to produce my pictures of birds. So I trust that you will enjoy this video, and do let me know how I can be of help to you in the comments below. This is Peter Lee, photographer in landscape, wildlife and commercial photography, signing off, and bye for now.